They laughed when the old man said he heard something dangerous. Until 30 minutes later, FBI SWAT locked down the entire retirement home and no one was allowed to leave. What he'd overheard in a language most people didn't even recognize had just prevented something no one would forget. The morning of November 3rd started, like every other morning at Meadowbrook Retirement Home in Northern Virginia. The breakfast cart rolled through the hallways at 7:30 sharp. Medication rounds began at 8. The television in the common area played morning news on low volume while residents shuffled in for coffee. And in room 14, a man named Marcus Aldridge sat by his window watching the parking lot with the same quiet attention he'd maintained for the past 18 years. He was 71 years old. Gray hair cut short, reading glasses that slid down his nose when he looked at his books. A preference for cardigan sweaters and plaid shirts. To everyone at Meadowbrook, he was just another elderly resident. Polite when spoken to, reserved in conversation. The kind of man who played chess on Tuesday afternoons and always returned his library books on time. The staff knew him as the one who never complained. Never asked for special treatment. Never caused any trouble at all. He kept to himself. Read thick books with small print. Took his coffee black. Watched the parking lot. That was Marcus Aldridge. Quiet. Predictable, unremarkable. But that was exactly what he wanted them to think. The white van arrived at 8:42 in the morning. Marcus noticed it immediately. Not because it was unusual for maintenance vehicles to visit. Meadowbrook was an older building. Things broke down. Systems needed repairs. Service calls happened weekly. But Marcus noticed details other people missed. He always had. The van pulled into the parking lot and stopped near the side entrance. 2 men got out. Navy blue work uniforms, names stitched above the pockets. Toolboxes in hand. They looked exactly like what they were supposed to be. HVAC technicians. Routine maintenance. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious except Marcus saw the way they moved. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Most people would have glanced and gone back to their coffee. But Marcus had spent 32 years watching people who didn't want to be watched. He knew the difference between a tradesman and someone pretending to be one. The first man scanned the parking lot before walking toward the entrance. Not a casual glance. A tactical assessment, looking for cameras, checking sight lines, measuring distances. The second man kept his hand near his hip. Not nervous, not reaching for tools. The kind of unconscious gesture that came from carrying a weapon for so long you forgot it wasn't always there. Marcus stood up slowly. His knees protested. Age did that. Made simple movements complicated. Made quick reactions impossible. But his mind was as sharp as it had been in 1982. He moved toward the door. Opened it carefully. The hallway was empty except for a nurse disappearing into another room. Marcus walked toward the stairwell. His steps were measured. Deliberate, he didn't hurry. Hurrying drew attention, and attention was the last thing he wanted. The basement door was propped open, probably for the maintenance crew. Marcus pushed through and descended the stairs. His hand gripped the railing. The steps were steep. His knees complained with each one, but he kept moving. At the bottom he paused, listened. Voices echoed from somewhere down the hall. Not English, not Spanish. Not any of the common languages you'd hear in Northern Virginia. Something else. Something most Americans wouldn't recognize. Something Marcus knew immediately. He moved closer to the mechanical room. The door was cracked open. Probably for ventilation. The voices were clearer now. 2 men speaking in rapid sentences. Low tones. Focused. Professional. Marcus stopped just outside the door and closed his eyes. Let his brain process the sounds. Let decades of training take over. The language clicked into place like a key turning in a lock. Chechen, North Caucasus dialect, specifically the variant spoken in the mountain regions near Dagestan. He hadn't heard it in 28 years, but his brain recognized it like an old song. The words came through in fragments. 3rd floor, ventilation shaft, 20 kilograms, C4 plastic explosive, distribution points, timer mechanism, detonation sequence synchronized, 1100 hours. Federal courthouse. Maximum casualties. Media impact. The words painted a picture Marcus understood immediately. They weren't fixing the HVAC system. They were wiring the building to explode. And they were doing it in a retirement home full of people who couldn't evacuate quickly, people who used walkers, wheelchairs, people who needed help getting downstairs, people like the ones Marcus had lived with for 18 years. Marcus turned and walked back toward the stairs. His face remained completely calm. No panic, no fear, just the same measured expression he always wore. But inside, his mind was calculating. 62 residents currently in the building. 6 staff members. The mechanical room connected to the main ventilation system. Distribution across 3 floors. 20 kilograms of C4 would be enough to collapse the entire west wing. The blast radius would extend into the parking lot. Shrapnel would tear through walls. Windows would shatter. The building would come down in sections. Death toll would be catastrophic. And based on what he'd heard, the timer was set for 1100 hours. 2 hours and 18 minutes from now. He climbed the stairs. Each step took effort. Age made everything harder, but he kept moving. Reached the first floor. The hallway was busier now. Residents moving toward the common area. Morning activities starting. Everything normal. Everything routine. No one knew what was happening in the basement. No one understood they were sitting on top of enough explosives to level the building. Marcus walked past them all, headed straight for the director's office. Patricia Chen had been the facility director for 6 years. She was good at her job, organized, compassionate, professional. She handled complaints well, managed the budget carefully, made sure residents felt valued. Marcus had always respected her, but now he needed her to do something she'd never done before. He needed her to trust him completely, without questions, without hesitation. Because there wasn't time for anything else. The office door was open. Patricia was at her computer, probably reviewing the daily schedule. Marcus knocked once and stepped inside, closed the door behind him. Patricia looked up and smiled, started to say good morning, but something in Marcus's face stopped her. He didn't sit down, didn't make small talk, just looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Completely serious, completely focused. The quiet old man from room 14 was gone. Someone else was standing in his place. Marcus told her the 2 men who'd just arrived weren't HVAC technicians. They were speaking Chechen in the basement, planning an attack, explosives, ventilation system. Timer set for 2 hours. She needed to evacuate the building immediately, quietly, no alarms, no panic, just get everyone to the east parking lot, away from the west wing, away from the mechanical room. Move the residents who could walk first, then wheelchair users, then anyone who needed assistance. She had less than 2 hours. But she needed to start right now. Patricia stared at him. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked confused, concerned. The kind of expression people make when they think someone might be having a medical episode. She started to speak, started to say something about misunderstandings, about how Marcus might have heard wrong, about how she should probably call a nurse to check on him. But Marcus didn't let her finish. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. Not the basic flip phone Meadowbrook had issued him. Something else. An older model, thick, heavy, with an antenna that extended when you pulled it out. A secure phone. The kind that hadn't been commercially available in decades. The kind that only government agencies used. Marcus dialed a number from memory. 11 digits. Area code, exchange 4 more numbers. The line clicked twice. Then a tone Marcus hadn't heard in 17 years. A digital authentication prompt. He entered a 6-digit code. The line clicked again. Connected. A voice answered. Professional. Alert. Expecting nothing important. Marcus spoke clearly. Used words Patricia didn't understand. Identified himself with a code designation. Alpha 7 Kilo 29er. Reported an active threat. Potential explosive device. Multiple subjects. Chechen dialect confirmed. Mechanical room. Meadowbrook Retirement Home. Route 29, Northern Virginia. Timer estimated at 120 minutes. Immediate federal response required. The voice on the other end went completely silent. 3 seconds, 4, 5. Then it came back. Different tone, sharper, more focused. The voice said a name. Marcus Aldridge. Full name. Rank, service dates, clearance level, everything. The voice asked if this was confirmed intelligence. Marcus said affirmative. The voice said federal response was inbound. Do not engage the subjects. Do not approach the device. Maintain cover position. Response time estimated at 6 minutes. The line went dead. Marcus looked at Patricia. Her face had gone pale. Her hands were shaking. She didn't understand what had just happened. But she understood enough. The quiet man in room 14 wasn't who she thought he was, had never been who she thought he was, and right now he was the only thing standing between her residence and a disaster that would make national news. Marcus repeated his instructions. Evacuate the first and second floors. East parking lot. Move quickly but quietly. Tell staff it's an unscheduled drill. Don't use the alarm system. Don't mention the word bomb. Don't let anyone go near the basement. She had less than 10 minutes before federal agents arrived. And she needed to have those residents clear before that happened. Patricia nodded, picked up her phone, started making calls. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. She was good at her job. Good in a crisis. She called the head nurse, then the activities coordinator, then the kitchen supervisor. Told them all the same thing. Emergency evacuation drill. Right now, no delays. Move everyone to the east parking lot. Use the side doors. Stay away from the west wing. No questions, just move. The staff responded immediately. They'd trained for this. Fire drills, emergency protocols. They knew what to do. Within 3 minutes, nurses were moving through the hallways, helping residents stand, distributing walkers, wheeling out the wheelchair users, keeping voices calm, keeping the pace steady. Marcus stepped out of the office. Watched the evacuation begin. Residents moved slowly. Some confused, some annoyed at the interruption. But they moved. The staff guided them toward the exits. Away from the west wing, away from the mechanical room where 2 men were wiring enough explosives to kill them all. Marcus checked his watch. 8:54. The FBI would arrive in approximately 4 minutes. The suspects might hear the evacuation, might realize something was wrong, might trigger the device early, or might assume it was just a drill, might stay focused on their work, might give the tactical team enough time to get inside. The minutes crawled. Marcus stood in the hallway, watching residents file past. An elderly woman with a walker asked him what was happening. Marcus told her it was just a drill. Nothing to worry about. She smiled and kept moving. A man in a wheelchair complained about missing his morning program. Marcus told him they'd be back inside soon. The man grumbled but rolled toward the exit. Slowly, section by section, the building emptied. The nurses were efficient, professional. Within 8 minutes, the first floor was clear. The second floor was still moving. Slower. More residents who needed assistance. But they were moving. Then Marcus heard it. The sound of vehicles. No sirens, just engines. Multiple vehicles moving fast. He walked to a window overlooking the front parking lot. 3 black SUVs rolled in tight formation, stopped in coordinated positions. Doors opened. Tactical teams exited, full gear. Ballistic vests, helmets, rifles. The FBI hostage rescue team, the best tactical unit in federal law enforcement. They moved like water, fast, fluid, covering angles, clearing sight lines. 2 teams split toward the basement entrance. 1 team secured the main entrance. A 4th team moved directly toward the director's office where Marcus was standing. The lead agent was a woman in her mid-40s. Sharp eyes, tactical headset. She entered the office and looked at Marcus for exactly 2 seconds, then nodded once. Federal recognition. She didn't ask questions, didn't request identification. She knew who he was. The moment his code designation had come through the system, his file had been pulled. 32 years NSA Cryptologic Division, Soviet Intercept Specialist, 9 languages fluent, 17 more conversational, clearance level Q, retired 1992. Current status inactive but security clearance never formally revoked, the kind of file that got attention, the kind of person whose call triggered immediate federal response. The agent told Marcus to stay in the office. The tactical teams were moving on the basement now. Bomb disposal was 3 minutes out. They'd extracted the suspects and cleared the device. His job was done. Marcus nodded, sat down in a chair. His legs were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline wearing off, from the reality of what had almost happened. He looked out the window at the parking lot, saw the residents clustered in groups, nurses distributing blankets, some residents sitting on the curb, others standing in confused clusters, all of them alive, all of them safe, because he'd been in the right place at the right time, because he'd kept his skills sharp, because he'd never really retired. Down in the basement, the tactical teams moved with precision. They'd trained for scenarios exactly like this. 2 suspects, confined space, explosive device. They breached the mechanical room in under 30 seconds. The suspects looked up, reached for something, but they were too slow. Tactical operators moved faster. Zip ties, restraints, suspects down and secured before they could trigger anything. The bomb disposal unit arrived 2 minutes later, entered the mechanical room, found exactly what Marcus had described. 22 kilograms of C4 plastic explosive, military grade, wired into the ventilation system, distribution points on 3 floors, timer mechanism, digital display, counting down, 1 hour and 47 minutes remaining. The disposal team worked carefully, photographed everything, documented the setup, then began disconnection procedures, cut the timer circuit first, then the backup trigger, then the detonation wires, section by section, component by component. Within 18 minutes, the device was completely neutralized. The C4 was removed, packaged for transport. The ventilation system cleared. The building secured. The all-clear was given at 9:23, 37 minutes after Marcus had made his call. 37 minutes between discovery and resolution. 37 minutes that had just saved 62 lives. But what they found in that mechanical room made even experienced federal agents pause. The sophistication of the device, the precision of the placement, the complexity of the timer system. This wasn't amateur work. These weren't random terrorists who'd learned bomb-making from internet videos. These were professionals, trained, equipped, well-funded, and the target selection told a story that made the FBI agents exchange looks. 3 blocks south of Meadowbrook stood the federal courthouse. A high-profile terrorism trial was scheduled to begin that morning at 1100 hours. The defendant's associates had been making threats for weeks, but nothing specific. Nothing actionable. Just general intimidation, the kind of noise that always surrounded major trials. But someone had planned something very specific. A retirement home bombing, maximum casualties, vulnerable victims. 3 blocks from the courthouse, timed to coincide with the trial opening. The media coverage would be overwhelming. Every news channel in the country would lead with it. Elderly victims, domestic terrorism, security failures. The trial would be postponed, maybe permanently. The defendant's supporters would claim victory. The government would face criticism, and 62 innocent people would have died to make a political statement. That was the plan. That was what would have happened if a 71-year-old cryptologist hadn't been sitting by his window, watching the parking lot, noticing details other people missed. The suspects were transported to a federal holding facility, separated immediately, interrogated by experienced agents who specialized in terrorism cases. And they broke faster than expected. Started talking within 2 hours, admitted everything, explained the entire operation. They'd been planning it for 6 months, chosen Meadowbrook specifically, researched the building, studied the ventilation system, acquired the explosives through contacts in Eastern Europe, entered the country on visitor visas, posed as contractors. Everything had gone perfectly, until the moment they started speaking to each other in their native language. Until the moment they assumed no one in a Virginia retirement home would understand Chechen. Until the moment 71-year-old Marcus Aldridge had closed his eyes and listened. The FBI wanted Marcus's statement. They sent a senior agent to interview him, not in an interrogation room, in the director's office at Meadowbrook. Comfortable chairs, coffee, respect. The agent asked how long it had been since he'd worked in cryptology. Marcus said 17 years since official retirement, but he'd kept his skills maintained. Still read in 9 languages daily, still listened to international radio broadcasts, still kept his mind sharp, just in case. The agent asked where he'd learned Chechen. Marcus explained his career. Fort Meade, 1975 to 1992, NSA Cryptologic Division, Soviet intelligence intercepts. When the Cold War ended, the agency's priorities shifted. But Marcus had specialized in Caucasus region languages, Chechen, Ingush, Avar, Georgian, languages that became more relevant after the Soviet collapse, languages that turned out to matter more than anyone expected. The agent asked why Marcus was living in a retirement home, why he'd never told anyone about his background, why he'd stayed silent for 18 years. Marcus looked out the window at the residents returning to the building, being escorted back to their rooms, life returning to normal. He told the agent the truth. After retirement, NSA had offered him consulting work, pay by the hour, come in when needed, but the work dried up. The agency wanted younger analysts, people who understood technology, digital encryption, cyber warfare. The old skills became obsolete. Language analysis, human intelligence, cultural expertise, those things didn't matter anymore. Or so everyone thought. Marcus had tried civilian life, bought a house, tried to be normal. But normal didn't work. The quiet felt wrong. The lack of purpose felt like drowning. He'd spent 32 years listening to conversations that mattered, preventing disasters no one would ever know about. And suddenly that was gone, replaced with grocery shopping and lawn maintenance. So he'd sold the house, moved to Meadowbrook, found a different kind of purpose, watching, listening, staying sharp, just in case the world still needed someone who could understand languages most people had never heard of. Just in case there was one more threat, one more conversation, one more moment where those old skills still mattered. The agent nodded slowly, asked if Marcus would be willing to provide detailed intelligence on the suspect's dialect patterns, help establish their regional origins, possibly testify in the terrorism trial. Marcus said yes to all of it. But he had one condition. His identity stayed classified. No media interviews, no public recognition, no news stories about the elderly hero who saved the retirement home. As far as the world needed to know, the FBI had received an anonymous tip. That was the narrative. That was the story that would be released. The agent understood. Witness protection protocols existed for exactly this reason. Marcus's name would never appear in any public document. His role would remain classified. The residents of Meadowbrook would never know who he really was. Over the next several hours, the scene gradually cleared. The tactical teams packed their equipment. The bomb disposal unit removed the last components. The suspects were gone. The media arrived and were kept behind police barriers. News helicopters circled overhead. Reporters filed stories about a thwarted terrorist attack. Federal agents preventing a tragedy. Quick response time. Professional execution. But none of them knew how it started. None of them knew about the phone call from room 14. None of them knew about Marcus Aldridge. And that was exactly how it needed to be. By afternoon, life at Meadowbrook had almost returned to normal. The residents were back in their rooms. Lunch was served on schedule. The common area television played game shows. But something had changed. The staff looked at Marcus differently. Not obviously. Just a subtle shift. More respect. More attention. Patricia brought him coffee that afternoon. Didn't say anything. Just set the cup down and nodded. The head nurse stopped by his room. Asked if he needed anything. Smiled warmer than usual. They didn't know the details. Just that the quiet man in room 14 had somehow been at the center of whatever happened that morning. 3 days later, a package arrived. Federal courier, no return address. Hand-delivered to Patricia with instructions to give it to Marcus Aldridge only. She brought it to his room personally. Marcus opened it alone. Inside was a single letter, NSA letterhead. Signed by the director personally, it thanked him for his continued service. Both his decades at Fort Meade and his actions at Meadowbrook. It informed him that his security clearance had been temporarily reactivated, that his expertise was still valued, that the agency had been wrong to think the old skills didn't matter anymore, that language analysis and cultural understanding were more important than ever, that if he wanted to consult, if he wanted to teach, if he wanted to help train the next generation. The door was open. Marcus read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in his desk drawer, next to the secure phone he'd kept hidden for 17 years, next to his old NSA identification badge from 1992, next to a photograph of himself at Fort Meade, wearing headphones and sitting in front of recording equipment. The physical artifacts of a career most people would never know about. A career that had officially ended in 1992, but had somehow continued for one more operation, one more threat, one more moment where the quiet man who listened to languages had prevented something catastrophic. The following week, the news ran follow-up stories. The terrorism suspects had been charged with conspiracy to use weapons of mass destruction. attempted murder, domestic terrorism. The evidence was overwhelming. Their confessions detailed. The sentences would be life without parole. Legal analysts discussed the case. National security experts debated terrorism prevention strategies. But none of them mentioned the retirement home resident. None of them talked about the 71-year-old cryptologist. None of them knew that the entire investigation had started because someone had understood a conversation in Chechen. On Tuesday afternoon, Marcus went to the chess club. Same as always. Same room, same time, same people. His regular opponent was Dorothy, a retired schoolteacher who'd been playing chess for 50 years. They set up the board, started their match. Dorothy moved her pawn. Marcus responded. They played in comfortable silence. After the third move, Dorothy looked up, told Marcus he seemed different lately, more present, more focused, like something had shifted. Marcus just smiled, said he'd been sleeping better. Dorothy didn't push. They finished their game. She won. Marcus congratulated her. They shook hands. Everything normal. Everything routine. That evening, Marcus sat by his window, watched the ordinary comings and goings. Nothing unusual. But Marcus knew how quickly normal could shatter, how easily violence could arrive disguised as routine maintenance, how fragile safety really was, and how important it was that someone stayed vigilant. Marcus thought about his career. 32 years of listening to people who didn't want to be heard, preventing attacks that never made the news because they never happened. The victories were invisible, the recognition non-existent. You stopped disasters before they started. You saved lives that never knew they were in danger. That was intelligence work. The moment you sought credit was the moment you stopped being effective. The investigation continued for weeks. But the official story remained consistent. Anonymous tip. Quick response. 62 lives saved. The residents never suspected the quiet man in room 14. Marcus maintained his routine. Chess on Tuesdays. Everything predictable. But he kept the secure phone charged. Kept his languages sharp. Kept watching, because threats didn't retire, and neither did people like Marcus. 3 weeks after the incident, 2 NSA analysts visited Marcus. They'd reviewed his 1983 proposal about maintaining language specialists. He'd been right. 28 years early. But right, they asked him to build a program, train the next generation, the Aldridge Cultural Intelligence Initiative. Marcus said yes, because that was what people like him did. They served, even after retirement, even at 71. The program launched 6 months later at Fort Meade. Marcus taught 3 days a week, and every morning at Meadowbrook he still sat by his window, watched the parking lot, remembered the day his retirement had ended, the day he'd proven the old skills still mattered, always would, and in room 14 Marcus Aldridge kept listening, kept watching, kept ready, because that's what protectors did. For as long as threats kept speaking in languages they thought were secret, for as long as people needed protecting, for as long as the quiet man in room 14 kept watching the parking lot, and listening, always listening,